right, we are ready now to start winding our warp. And I'd like to show you that at on the floor, you either put cones of yarn, or in this case, I have the 2 balls of yarn or the 2 cakes. I'm going to do 2 at a time rather than 1 at a time. Right away, I'm cutting my time in half. So I recommend, if you can, when you're purchasing yarn to weave, to get 2 cones perhaps, 2 balls or whatever. So right away, you can do things in a little less time. So it's one of my tricks. Now I'm going to come over and I'm going to start to talk a little bit about the warping board, and then I'll do a little warping as well as coming back and talking a little bit more about some other tricks to do. So hello and welcome again. Now I do have my handy dandy paper with me that tells me what I'm going to be doing today. We figured the calculations out, and I figured out that I need 80 total ends, because for this particular project it's 8 ends per inch. And I also know that my finished product, I'd like it to be 2.5 yards, or that's how I have 2 yards. It's going to be 2.5 yards on the warping board. But I'm going to also do another time-saving thing. I'm only going to do half a warp, which means I need to do a cross at both sides, or both ends. And I'll explain that in a moment. But let's take a look at the warping board first. So the warping board, in this case, this particular one, I happen to know that the pegs are 36 inches apart. So that makes calculating easy. As a weaver gets more experience, sometimes we don't always use a guide thread, but I'm going to use a guide thread today. So the guide thread, I want you to take a note that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yards. Well, I thought I said I only needed 2.5 yards. Well, I'm going to again show you another trick on what we can do to save a little time. There's a couple other things too, so I'll pause in between to go to the next step. So first of all, I have the 2, and what I'm going to do is I just put my finger between the 2 yarns to keep them a little separate so they don't tangle and they don't get too close. Now the other thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making a cross, and let me go all the way down at the bottom and at the top. So we go all the way down. And I'm going to do a cross here, and I'll zero in on that in a moment, which means one goes over and one under. I'm going to go back up again. So if I'm counting right now, it's 2, 4. And you notice I'm making an X here, 2, 4. And now we're going to go 6. And then this is 8. Because, like I said, I'm doing 8. So I'm going to loop that over here for a moment because I want to show you another little trick. Now I happen to do like a little half hitch in grouping. You can tie a knot or do whatever you want. So what I'm going to do, since I just did an inch, I'm going to take a group right here, and I'm going to group these 8 together, because that tells me right now that I've done 1 inch. The other thing, when you're winding on a warp, you don't want to go real tight. 2 reasons. You want to be able to take it off the warping board without stretching, and the other reason is that it will skewer your measurements. Because what happens is, as you keep going on, it might get a little bit tighter. So then sometimes when you wind on a warp, especially a wide warp, the one side seems to be a little shorter than the other side. And a lot of times it has to do with how the yarn was wound on a warping board. So you just see that I did 1 inch. And now we're going to go on and do the second inch. So again, 2, 4, 6, 8. All right, and again, I'm going to step away in a minute. I'm going to, again, group this, and then I'm going to step away and kind of zero in. Hopefully you can see what is going on here. So let's see if we can do a little close-up of what's happening over here. So I now have 2 groups. I have 1 inch and I have the 2nd inch. And if we go over to the cross, let's go to the one up on the top here. And what's happening is they're every other. So group 1, the next one, and you see they're separate. It's kind of like your hands, one. So when we start to warp, you'll have, well, actually 2 coming off at a time. And that's the reason that we do the cross on the warping board or on the warping mill. All right, I might have said I had 1 more inch to do, but we have 1 more to do. I was doing another project earlier, and that was set to be 8 inches wide, but this particular project is 10 inches wide in the loom. So we have 1 more inch to do because I'm going to show you another trick on how to fold the whole thing in half and save time. So again, we're going to continue. Now we're on our, again, 2. And this is 4. And again, I'm still making my cross at both sides. 4. 6. And again, I'm trying not to go too tight. 6. Down and over. And then back. And this is the last one. Just going to loop it around that for now. And now I'm going to take this and again group. You can tie it if you want to. Sometimes on the last one, I actually make a little tie, and I can just tie it kind of tight. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But again, I'm going to fold the whole thing in half. But before I continue, I do need to cut these threads. I'm going to cut the ones up here, and I'll show you. I usually just kind of tie them together. I'm going to do like a little square knot. Again, not too tight. We have it like that. So there are 2 important places that we want to make sure we tie, right here and down here, because this particular project we have 2 crosses. Now what I like to do is I like to recycle things, and in this case I'm using some good old pantyhose, leotards, whatever. Now the first part I'm going to do is going to make sure that I go right through here, through the back, and I come around this direction. I'm going to, again, try not to get the guide thread. I'm going to do 1 tie. The other reason why I like these, I only have to do 1 tie. I'm going to do the same thing at the other end. Bring it through and tie it. Now, like I said, this is I'm going to do this in half. So halfway would be about here. And then the other places that I'm going to make sure I tie are up here and also here. And then it's also nice to tie a few places. I don't have a lot of ties here, but I'm going to put one about here. And another one here. And you could do a few more if you want to. Just kind of keeps everything kind of nice and tidy, so to speak, right now. So now it's fairly secure. Now I can do one of two things if I want to. I could literally cut this here, and then I will have two warps, or I can fold it in half, because there are two sections I'm going to fold together and put where the least sticks are that'll go into the cross here. Now I remember when I started, the math said that I needed 2.5 yards, and in this case, since I doubled it, I decided to do 6 or 3 yards for each one, just for a little extra in case there was a mistake, and I have a little extra waste on that. So there's no harm if you have enough yarn to do a little bit more than you think is needed. So for this particular time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to get some other items that I need to show you the next. All right, now you can see I have over here, I've added an extra pantyhose because I decided I'm going to cut this in half, and then we're going to chain 2 separate warps, and I'll show you what's happening. So at the top here, that's all nicely tied together. And then, like I said, there's one at the bottom. All right, so let's take a look at one way of doing this. And you will have basically 2 warps, and we're going to use the sticks that we call the least sticks. So if you don't know what a least stick is, you'll find out momentarily what that is. All right, so I'm going to take this off and cut it. Okay. And now I'm going to have 2 separate warps. So I'm going to chain the one, and chaining really means crocheting with your hand. Okay, so your hand is the hook. So if you have a very long warp, you can do it nice and tight. You just need one that's fairly tight. It's basically keeping things nice and tidy. So I'm going to do the same thing at the other end. Let me step over here. And do the same thing, chaining or crocheting with my hand. I know people knit with their hands or knitting. I've never done that, but I know I could do the crocheting. So we now have 2 small warps. And what we're going to do right now, you can see this one's already kind of looped over. This is the cross. So what I'm going to do for demonstration purposes, I'm going to take this one up here, and I'm going to loop this right next to the other one. And now we'll have to loop it again a little bit. Let's see if I can. Okay, we'll loop it over here. So now we have 2 crosses. And basically the least sticks go in between theirs. Now sometimes you can bring your sticks over and put them right in, like I'm doing here, and then we can take this and carry it right over to the loom. Sometimes people will literally, to be careful, to be more careful, is there's holes at each end. You can put shoelaces or string or whatever else, some other scrap yarn you have. So right now, I now have 2 of those, and like I said, I just saved myself some time. I actually have 10 inches here, 80 ends per inch, but I only did half the warp at a time and then cut it in half and fold it over. So that's another trick. If you would like to try it, you can do that. Might be something you want to try, and it might not be. But again, I'm trying to take a little stress off making the warp and threading the loom. And now the next stage will be going over to the loom, putting this on, and we'll start winding the warp on the loom.